Hey everyone, I'm Alex.
And I'm Jack.
And in today's video, we'll be ranking the bosses of Star Wars Bounty Hunter from worst to best as part of our ongoing Star Wars game boss ranking series. As both a semi-continuation and delineation of Hayden Blackman's 2002 Jango Fett Open Seasons comic run, Star Wars Bounty Hunter sees you take on the role of Jango Fett, the most feared man of the pre-Phantom Menace era, in an attempt at making, quote, the ideal vessel through which the player could live out the fantasy of being the galaxy's most dangerous bounty hunter. Set 10 years before the events of Attack of the Clones, you shoot, roll, and fly your way throughout the galaxy, traveling from the murky depths of Coruscant's underworld to the asteroid prison of Ovo 4 to even Tatooine, as part of Sith Lord Darth Tyrannus' quest to find the ultimate human template for cloning.
As the first ever collaboration between LucasArts, Skywalker Sound, and ILM, the cinematics and realistic in-game movement became a commonly praised talking point for their well beyond their years appearance that still holds up 20 years later. Not to mention, Temuera Morrison reprises his role as Jango Fett, and Clancy Brown, most famously Mr. Krabs but in the Star Wars universe best known as Savage Opress, plays the villainous Montross, an ex-Mandalorian turned mercenary. While the game has a steeper cliff drop than Dark Souls' historically awful second half, the combat and gameplay are fairly complex, albeit limited due to hardware, nonetheless fun even with... this? With some snickers and a few standouts, Bounty Hunter features a semi-arbitrary boss catalog made up of fantastic legends, creatures, characters, and vehicles, some of whom took me literal hours of research to discover. I had a great time playing this game, Alex not so much, but either way the bosses were a treat, and even more so considering the game was made over 2 decades ago at this point. So, with all that said, let's get into it.
After suffering through the nightmares that are 5-1 and 5-2, it's an insult to injury that the final boss of Chapter 5 is by far the worst in the game. This game is always a merciless button mash fest, for the record this being far from the worst offender, but there's plenty of other bullshit to rain on your parade. For starters, have fun trying to kill the rocket-spamming fuckers on the balconies. Assuming you can even get up there in the first place without the missiles blasting you off the edge from knockback, killing Gardella's thugs is deceptively frustrating. For some reason, Jango likes to target the Krayt Dragon no matter where you're directionally aiming, so 75% of the time I'd be standing in their face shooting the wrong way with 1 or 2 guns, while they unload bazooka payloads right up my asshole. It's like if the Tower Knight from Demon's Souls fucking sucked. Every time Jango got sent flying onto his backside and took 10 years to crawl up only for a rocket to hit him as soon as he stood up, I felt like I was playing something I'd see in the Angry Video Game Nerd. The dragon itself is also tanky as all hell. I was freaked out I was going to get a repetitive strain injury after spamming that much for so long. I'm still unsure what to make of this game. I found it generally repetitive and miserable, but it has a weird charm to it that I can't ignore either. The Krayt Dragon is the only boss I'd say is outright horrible or even bad, with a massive jump in quality between this and the next on our list.
This game's flying introduction kicks off with the Borhek, a species bred for pit fighting. In the midst of searching for Miko Ginty, Jango found his way to the Outland Transit Station, wherein he got trapped in the pit fighting circuit, eventually getting stuck in the ring with Miko's Borhek. This fight is reasonably basic, seeing as it's the combat tutorial. The Borhek, being genetically modified, has an impenetrable shell while stationary and moves in a slow, straight line that opens it up to damage. You stand in front of it to bait it into the electric fence like a bull, and attack dodgeable with any amount of effort. Easy as they come, the Borhek is a neat creature, but ultimately falls to the back end of the list from being simply nothing at all.
This thing is one of the most obscure entries in all of the Star Wars expanded universe. Jack is the primary lore expert between the two of us, and while trying to find it, even he had to go through over 15 Wikipedia pages. If you've ever heard of the Vat-E, well, you probably shouldn't have. So we got a lot of crap in the Revenge of the Sith video for saying Lati instead of L-A-A-T. Just wanted to point out that it is pronounced Lati because there's actually an I at the end standing for infantry. Same goes for the Vati, the E being for enforcement. Anyways, before we put this video out, the number of people who knew this thing by name was probably in the single digits. How does the fight hold up? Well, about as well as anything else in the game, I guess. Pretty similar to Miko's ship, except you have to use explosives to finish it off in the end. This would have been a nice thing for them to, communicate to you somehow instead of just making your blasters randomly become ineffective without explanation. Once you know what to do, it ain't too bad, and in a game full of instances where it's not very obvious what to do throughout, it's not like this is something you shouldn't have seen coming.
While, as we said, the Vati took me a brief hour-long stay on Wikipedia, the VARPV, or Variable Altitude Republic Repulsor Lift Patrol Vehicle, is one of the most obscure Legends ships by far. So far gone, it's not even in the 2008 Complete Encyclopedia. Similar to the other vehicle bosses in the game, the VARPV has 6 weak points spread out across its lengthy design, most importantly 3 mechanical arms, each featuring a missile launcher. As UVO 4's last defense, it reasonably has a large amount of offensive capability, but the Grand Arena makes it a far easier boss than perhaps intended. Nonetheless, it's much better this way than difficult for the sake of being so.
At the end of your fun little jungle safari on Malastare, you get a rematch with good old Montross, although for some reason he decides to spend this encounter doing absolutely nothing but jerking off on a skiff a ways out from your platform. This fight is bafflingly easy, even more so if you have fun with the rockets like I did. Jack opted to use the sniper rifle as you see here, but ultimately your tool of choice has little bearing on the outcome of this fight. Losing is virtually impossible unless you decide to hurl yourself off the cliff upon realizing beating him moves you onwards to Chapter 5. He's a pushover, but it's extremely rare that the game is this nice to you, so I'm not going to lodge any complaints.
Alex and I had a good laugh at poor old Longo, just a funny looking, funny sounding, unnecessarily hard fight to close one of the most stressful levels I've ever played through. Beyond having a stat-padded increase in health, the only true discernation between Longo 2 Guns and any of his other Klatani goons is that he has, well, 2 guns. The game seems to make it so you can capture him, although I have no idea how to do so, but on a random side note, when Sideshow Collectibles began doing Expanded Universe 1/6 statues, their artistic team drew up a non-canonical ending to Longo by way of Jabba's Gamorrean executioner. While being nothing particularly special, the satisfaction of chopping down dozens of thugs in a tiny room through strategy and positioning makes Longo fun, excusing lazy design.
This is the first big boss in the game you square up against, and for what it's worth, it's pretty fun. Mashing square to blow up the various weapons on the ship was satisfying and gave it a nice sense of progression. It's a lot like the Vati we discussed earlier, but if it had an arena to navigate around and a no weird arbitrary explosion finisher requirement. For fans of a nice dose of shoot it till it dies gameplay, this is the thing for you.
Without context, Montross is a somewhat random villain who on surface level appears to be no more than competition with Django for the 5 million credit bounty on Komari Vosa. His introduction cinematic is blazing, keep in mind, although he looks more like an Umbaran than a human. Nonetheless, with the background given in Django Fett Open Seasons, not only this boss but Montross as a character has much more emotional weight. When Django was just a young child, he was taken in by Mandalore Jaster Muriel after Tor Vizsla, founder of Deathwatch, murdered his biological parents. Under Muriel's parentage, Django emerged as one of the Mandalorian's greatest young prospects up until Muriel's death during the battle on Corta 6 resulting from Montross's betrayal. Anyways, with the proper background established, this fight is great. While it takes about 45 minutes to climb up to the actual arena, Montross benefits from the freshness of the jetpack only introduced 3 levels back. The grimy setting of Coruscant's industrial district works extremely well with Montross's character, beginning with him freezing Django's bounty in carbon. The fight is like any gun-to-gun face-off, although saving the blaster rifle found before the carbon freezing chamber makes it go by much smoother. While not challenging as long as you keep your distance, Montross on Coruscant is the ideal way to introduce an antagonist and delivers all the while.
After a brief romp through her spooky, haunted house, Komari Vosa finally stops running and the ultimate showdown for 5 million credits begins. It's pretty tense until you realize Vosa isn't quite dealing with a full set of cards, if you catch my drift. Hilariously, Vosa seems to have not got the memo that deflecting blaster bolts is a good way to avoid becoming a crunchy munchie. Obviously, it'd be super fucking annoying if she blocked all your shots and forced you to use your fists or something, but I feel like some other way to defeat her would have worked better. At the very least, I'd have given her a ranged force attack to ensure you can't just jetpack backwards endlessly with no threat. Don't get me wrong, I had a blast with this fight and have no genuine complaints. I just think it'd have been nice if the final boss put up a fight rather than a comedy routine. Watching her Naruto run at full speed into flesh-melting plasma rays is worth a good laugh, but not much in the tension department. If she somehow does manage to catch you lacking, she gets a nice little finisher cutscene like Montross did, which is cool. Former Padawan of Dooku, Komari Vosa has an awesome atmosphere and setup, and while the gameplay front is a tad disappointing, it's still a good time and worthy of beating out the majority of the other bosses in the game.
Seeing as Komari Vosa is cheesable and even slightly tedious, Montross on the Moon of the Dead was, for us both, the most faultless and in turn best boss in the game. What makes it so brilliant, aside from dialogue and death cutscenes, is that the arena is built around allowing all forms of combat to be used. And to state the obvious, it follows quite possibly the worst level in gaming history, giving Montross's defeat such an extreme level of satisfaction, all resulting from said level, that puts even the most heinous Souls boss run-ups to shame. I experimented more here than I did at any other instance in the game. Hell, even the grenades work. Both of you have jetpacks at this point. The fight also establishes Montross's brief return as a Mandalorian, and with it being a fight between two of the greatest non-Force user bounty hunters of the time, it's reasonably close. With a gruesome but fitting death, Montross's last stand sends off a fantastic character in a very climactic way, while also rightfully earning itself the top spot with little room for disagreement.
Thanks so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. Next week I'll be diving back into the Zelda franchise with a video on the Dungeons of Skyward Sword, so if that sounds like it'd be up your alley, be sure to tune in. That's all for now. Deuces.